men were a bit more risk-taking, a bit more competitive, a bit more inclined to kind of rational approaches to problems, that was better.
Yeah.
That's the definition, in my mind, a useful definition of patriarchy. A patriarchy is one where more typically masculine virtues or attributes are seen as better. It's hard for me to imagine a world where it wouldn't be mostly men selecting into that occupation because it's very high risk, right? And you could think of others.
Yeah.
If there weren't differences, why on earth would we care about gender diversity? For the love of God, guys, feminism doesn't mean you shouldn't offer to help me get my overhead down on the plane. You are taller. You are stronger. Get my bag down, because I think men are almost entirely wrongly afraid if they offer, right, that the woman will turn to them and say, why, because I'm weaker than you? I've come to believe that some of those symbolic acts, which are quite gendered, are still valuable, even in a world where we want absolute substantive gender equality. I was raised to, when you're walking along a street, to always, with a woman, always to put yourself roadside. That's all coded in you.
Yeah.
And you see it actually even in quite tragic circumstances in the US, when you see these kind of mass shooting incidents, when they do the kind of, when they reconstruct afterwards, what you very often see is that quite often men have been killed when they're just automatically putting their body between the shooter and their girlfriend or somebody, usually a woman, right? And there's also this great photograph of a baseball heading towards a kid, right? It's been whacked really hard and it's heading towards this kid. And you just these two guys doing this, right, in the shot. They're like diving in front of it. Whereas the mums are kind of like doing this, like the dads are like...
They're protecting the kids?
Yeah. And whoever's going to get hit by it, right? And again, they didn't think through, oh, my body's big, it's just a reaction. And the road one is very interesting. And again, most of the women that I've been with, I don't say anything, I just do it. I just go roadside. And that's because the road could be that you could get splashed, it's dirty, so it could be like a chivalry thing. It's about, but I also think it's more that there's more danger there, like if someone comes off the road or something. Like, so to the extent that just at some psychological level, more danger that side, right? You want to put yourself between that and the woman that you're with. And it's happening at quite a natural level. Now, is there any danger there? Does it make any kind of sense? Probably not. But is it still symbolically quite a good thing? And my answer would be yes. And I know not everyone's going to agree with this, but I've come to believe that some of those symbolic acts, which are quite gendered, are still valuable, even in a world where we want absolute substantive gender equality. And so the test would be, you hold the door for a woman who's your boss, and that's okay. You're okay with the fact that having gone through the door, she goes to the CEO suite, right? And she's okay with the fact that even though she's the CEO and your boss, you held the door for her. And so I sometimes fear that in our desire to sort of squeeze out all of these symbolic differences, we lose a little bit of those symbols of difference, which even in a world of complete gender equality, which we're hopefully getting closer to, I don't know if we want to eradicate them. And increasingly, I find a lot of young women not wanting to eradicate them. They want us to many of them want us to hold the door, but then, by God, help them rise up the corporate ladder if that's necessary and have no problem at all with them being our boss, them being boss to us. That's what they ask of us. I think that's a reasonable thing for them to ask. We can do that, right? But actually, I've noticed there's quite a lot of feminists now. They're like, I've seen this a bit on social media. They're like, for the love of God, guys, feminism doesn't mean you shouldn't offer to help me get my overhead down on the plane. You are taller. You are stronger. Get my bag down. And I do think, and you've seen a bit of reluctance around that, because I think men are almost entirely wrongly afraid if they offer, right, that the woman will turn to them and say, why, because I'm weaker than you, right? That's, by the way, that's never going to happen, almost never going to happen. But she might say, no, I'm good, thanks, I'm fine, right? But particularly if it's obviously a shorter woman or a kind of older woman or even a man, right? But more, and so I think that's the kind of danger, is that some of this has kind of descended into this kind of, these symbols are bad. Meanwhile, we've got so much more work to do to get more women on boards and increase female safety, that it sort of feels like too much politics has become locked in these symbolic things. The arguments for gender diversity are based on the assumption there must be some differences.
Yeah.
If there weren't differences, why on earth would we care about gender diversity, right? If we don't
100%.
think that women and men are bringing something different to the party, not just because of their life experience, but like something else a bit different, but risk-taking, competition, etc. If we didn't think that mattered, then we wouldn't care how many board members were women. But we do care about that, quite rightly, because we presume that actually there are some differences between men and women. And so sometimes the idea that there are differences between men and women is seen as a conservative idea, but weirdly it underpins a lot of the progressive movements for gender diversity.
Yeah.
If there are differences, the problem in the past was that, let's say, men were a bit more risk-taking, a bit more competitive, a bit more inclined to kind of rational approaches to problems, that was better.
Yeah.
That's the definition, in my mind, a useful definition of patriarchy. A patriarchy is one where more typically masculine virtues or attributes are seen as better, right? And you could argue that a matriarchy, were we to have one, would be the other way around. And an equal society isn't one of androgyny. It's one where they're treated as of equal value. So we don't say one is better than the other. We say they're different and try and bring them into kind of collaborative and constructive and rather beautiful equality. But I do think a lot of people are making the mistake of thinking that equality requires androgyny. On average, boys and men, somewhat more likely to take risks, right? So let's take that as an example. Like, does it matter? Well, it does matter in some negative ways because you just identified, look, there's an addiction issue. There's also like teenage boys, like twice as likely to die as teenage girls from car crashes or accidents, much more likely to drown, all these kinds of things, right? Because they're just taking more risks, right? And so that aspect of kind of risk-taking, and especially if the risks involve somebody else's life or well-being, obviously that's a problem. But if the risk-taking means that, say, they're on average a little bit more likely to kind of take a risk in business, right? Or they're more likely to sign up to be a smoke jumper. A smoke jumper is someone, you have these wildfires out in kind of west of the US, right, in California and places like that, in very remote places. Sometimes the only way to fight the fire is to parachute people into the middle of the fire, or just close to the fire, in the middle of nowhere, out of a plane. So basically, these are people who, for a living, parachute out of perfectly serviceable aeroplanes into a raging inferno and stay there for as many days as necessary to try and fight the fire. Incredibly dangerous, and it's almost all men. It's hard for me to imagine a world where it wouldn't be mostly men selecting into that occupation because it's very high risk, right? And you could think of others. Is that okay? Probably. Right? You don't want to exclude anybody, but you're also not going to freak out that one's not kind of 50-50. And you're also going to say, well, that's good. And on the risk take, actually, I think you'll be interested in it. I'd like to get your reaction to this because I was very interested to discover that this is based on one study, to be clear, but I liked the study, that companies that are led by women, as in CEO and CFO, both women, are a bit less likely to go bankrupt than ones run by men, but a little bit less profitable. Some people look at that data, right? I'll be unfair to them. They'd say, well, of course, look at these profitable companies led by men, these entrepreneurial risk-taking men. That's why men have to be running all the companies, right? And these women, they're just too safetyism. They're just too scaredy cat, right, for capitalism, right? So let's have men. And the other view would be like, hey, look at all these women-led companies that don't go under as often, don't go bankrupt. Sure, they're a bit less profitable, but they're less risky. So we should have women running companies. Or your conclusion, which is, given that there's probably likely benefits to both sides of that, and again, recognizing it's not all women and all men, maybe we should have diverse leadership teams. That seems to me to be the right conclusion from that. But the conclusion is itself